This is a production of Cornell University.
I'm Ken McLean. I teach in the English department, and it is an extreme delight, on behalf of the Cornell Creative Writing Program, to welcome you to one of the hallmarks of the Fall 2008 reading series. The series, which has included many of the world's finest writers, is offered by the great generosity of two anonymous Cornell donors. We owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. As someone who has been here now teaching for 34 years, until those wonderful donors came forward, we lived in a very arid literary landscape. I'd also like to thank Professor Helena Veramontes, Director of the Creative Writing Program, who is unfortunately not present, and of course, Laurel Guy, who, tireless champion of all that matters, deserves our greatest thanks. If you are interested in interviews with our writers in the series, please visit, and this is capitals, writers@cornellblogspot.com to hear J. Robert Leonard's wonderful conversations. If you didn't get that, come up and see me, because this is a different world and generation. I'd also like to thank John Niederbuhl from the Cornell campus store, who is selling Mr. Simic's books today. John has been a passionate co-conspirator in all we do. Mr. Simic will be available to sign books upstairs in the reception, and the books are here, obviously. Please come to the reception, buy many books. I mean, do that, right? And enjoy the wonderful food and company. I want to make one announcement about a reading downtown and then get into my introduction, which will be very short, very sweet, because you don't want to listen to me. Iraqi Kakabatsi, who also read here a couple weeks back, will be reading Saturday, October 4th at 3 p.m. at the First Unitarian Church in the Ithaca City of Asylum's Freedom Reading. And please come to that. It's really important. It's really important that we make certain that writers survive in this world. And I'm getting to the point where we're going to probably have to worry about writers surviving in the United States of America. Okay. When I was growing up in Harlem, there was a woman who had been marked as a girl growing up in New Orleans. In truth, she had been kicked in the head by a horse when she was little. But truth has little to do with childhood. People in Harlem treated her as crazy, and she became crazy. Her hair was wild. She would run menacingly at children. She was rumored to pee in the bushes. And of course, I was taken with her. She was mystery incarnate. And one day, after a bit of coaxing, I came up to her and smiled. She looked at me, seemed eager to enter into my kindness, and then spit at me. "You're crazy," she said, "crazy." You are probably wondering why I begin my introduction of one of this country's best living poets this way. But I believe those of you who read Charles Simic will know why I find Mr. Simic's poetry so provident. In his great montages of image, announcements, and textual riffs, one that speak to me as Romer Bearden's collages do, that old woman becomes clear to me as folk heroine, as hurt soul, as indecipherable and irreducible. His poems are mystery kept intact, wonder never diminished. It is as if we were permitted to enter the sophistry of the cosmos. And yet, this is a world of men and women, of lovers, of the derided, of toy horses that, with the face of a boy, become menacing. Somehow, without fanfare, Mr. Simic's poems capture all of 21st century torment, and in a language that always shimmers, honors, celebrates, and mystifies. The Poet Laureate of the United States, Mr. Simic has published more than 60 books in the US and abroad, including translations, collections of essays, and 20 books of poetry. If you do not know That Little Something, 2008, My Noiseless Entourage, 2005, Selected Poems, 1963 to 203, 204, The Voices at 3 a.m., Selected Late and New Poems, 203, Night Picnic, 201, The Book of Gods and Devils, 200, and The World That Doesn't End, Prose Poems, 1990, for which he received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, Your Life Has Been Diminished. But do not worry. This is why we have bookstores and libraries. Mr. Simic is the Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and a recipient. Oh, no, well, actually, just step down. Day before, right? Okay, quit. I don't even want to go there. And a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts. In 1995, he was elected a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He is also Distinguished Emeritus Professor at the University of New Hampshire, where he's taught since 1973. An immigrant to the United States who only learned to speak English at age 15. He is, for many of us, a singular champion of poetry, possibility, and generosity, which is, again for many of us, tantamount to life itself. I am personally delighted to introduce the Poet Laureate of the United States, just resigned, Charles Simic. I rank him with Miles Davis and Nina Simone among the gods in this unruly universe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kenneth. Does this work? You can hear me? I have a little mic clipped on. Your story about that lady reminded me of something that happened to me long ago down in Greenwich Village. I was walking back late one night crossing the Washington Square Park. I mean, that was back in the 60s. I don't know when in the 60s, maybe early 60s. And this woman came up to me, who looked sort of the way you described your lady, you know, and she said to me, she said, "I'm Venus, the goddess of love. Give me $1 or I'll curse you and you'll never be happy in love." And I told her, I usually give everybody, you know, money, but that kind of pissed me off out of the blue. I said, go to hell. You know. So a couple months later, I was Barnes and Nobles. It used to be Barnes and Nobles on 17th Street and Fifth Avenue, and I was buying a book. They had the checkout counters, and it was sort of late in the afternoon, and I saw her in the other line, and she was waiting. I looked at her and I said, "You are Venus, the goddess of love." I mean, I just blurted it out, and she said, "Don't talk," you know. Anyway, so the world is full of wonderful people like that. I want to start by reading some poems from this book called The World Doesn't End, a book of prose poems that came in 1990. Very short poems without title. The type is large to give the impression that there's more on the page than there is. And many of them were written I realized later, I mean, they were kind of scribbled. They were not really written. They were scribbled in notebooks with no expectation. I had no idea what would happen with them. But they were written at the time when I was writing a long narrative of my early life. An encyclopedia asked me to compose a 40-page narrative of just, what happened to me from the beginning, until I was in my 20s. And so I did that, and very carefully trying to be, extremely accurate as much as I could remember. There were not many people left I could check with, because this happened, of course, in Yugoslavia and during the Second World War and before and after. But I took great care to tell the truth. But at the same time, as I was doing this diligent work, I kept thinking of more interesting versions of my life. Because, your life is like a movie you've seen too many times. I mean, it's not really that interesting, to go back and describe your first day in school, Anyway, so I'll just read a few of these poems, and as I say, they don't have any titles, so I can't give you any introductions or anything like that. They're also short. I was stolen by the gypsies. My parents stole me right back. Then the gypsies stole me again. This went on for some time. One minute I was in the caravan suckling the dark tit of my new mother. The next I sat at the long dining room table eating my breakfast with a silver spoon. It was the first day of spring. One of my fathers was singing in the bathtub. The other one was painting a live sparrow, the colors of a tropical bird. We were so poor I had to take the place of the bait in the mousetrap. All alone in the cellar, I could hear them pacing upstairs, tossing and turning in their beds. These are dark and evil days, the mouse told me as he nibbled my ear. Years passed. My mother wore a cat fur collar which she stroked until its sparks lit up the cellar. Everybody knows the story about me and Dr. Freud, says my grandfather. We were in love with the same pair of black shoes in the window of the same shoe store. The store, unfortunately, was always closed. There'd be a sign, death in the family, or back after lunch. But no matter how long I waited, no one would come to open. Once I caught Dr. Freud there shamelessly admiring the shoes. We glared at each other before going our separate ways, never to meet again. I'll do a couple more. My guardian angel is afraid of the dark. He pretends he's not. Sends me ahead, tells me he'll be along in a moment. Pretty soon I can't see a thing. This must be the darkest corner of heaven, someone whispers behind my back. It turns out her guardian angel is missing too. It's an outrage. The dirty little cowards leaving us all alone, she whispers. And of course, for all we know, I might be 100 years old already, and she just a sleepy little girl with glasses. Someone shuffles by my door muttering, "Our goose is cooked." Strange. I have my knife and fork ready. I even have the napkin tied around my neck, but the plate before me is still empty. Nevertheless, someone continues to mutter outside my door regarding a certain hypothetical, allegedly cooked goose that he claims is ours in common. Well, that particular poem was the oldest of that bunch, and the first part of that poem occurred to me back in, my God, I don't know, 59, 1960, whatever, 58. I came to New York, returned to New York from Chicago. I was first in New York, and then I went to Chicago and finished high school in Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago, and then lived there for a couple of years, and then left by myself and came to New York, and in 1958, in the summer of 1958, and I lived in, furnished rooms, flea bag hotels, and in the beginning, it was really lonely. I mean, I wanted to come back to New York because New York had more jazz, more art galleries, more theaters, more etc., all the things I was interested in. But I kind of forgot that the obvious fact that I didn't know anybody in the city, and, I was all by myself. And in the beginning, I was truly alone, and didn't want to go back to Chicago where I had a lot of friends because they would have told me, stupid, we told you. You're going to be lonely. Well, I didn't pay attention, So I stayed, and then I didn't think about this period at all for many, many years until late 80s. I suddenly remembered myself in that period, and not much happened in that period to kind of go back to, but and it was sort of delicious from a distance, writing about myself like a character. I saw myself without pity, kind of, as I was. And this is a poem called Shelley. Shelley, great romantic poet, whom I read before this particular day, but not really, extensively. And this day, in the fall of 1958, I thought, he was the greatest poet who ever lived, and so forth. And the poem has some lines from Shelley, which are not in quotation marks because I kind of put them in as I remembered them. I mean, later on I taught some poems of Shelley's, and, so they were in my head. But I kept postponing going back to actually rereading Shelley and putting quotation marks, so I never did. Anyway, but you'll see what it is. Shelley. Poet of the dead leaves, driven like ghosts, driven like pestilence-stricken multitudes. I read you first one rainy evening in New York City, in my atrocious Slavic accent, saying the mellifluous verses from a battered, much-stained volume I had bought earlier that day in a second-hand bookstore on 4th Avenue, run by an initiate of the occult masters. The little money I had being almost spent, I walked the streets, my nose in the book. I sat in a dingy coffee shop with last summer's dead flies on the table. The owner was an ex-sailor who had grown a huge hump on his back while watching the rain, the empty street. He was glad to have me sit and read. He'd refill my cup with a liquid dark as river Styx. Shelley spoke of a mad, blind, dying king, of rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, of graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illumine our tempestuous day. I too felt like a glorious phantom going to have my dinner in a Chinese restaurant I knew so well. It had a three-fingered waiter would bring my soup and rice each night without ever saying a word. I never saw anyone else there. The kitchen was separated by a curtain of glass beads which clicked faintly whenever the front door opened. The front door opened that evening to admit a pale little girl with glasses. The poet spoke of the everlasting universe of things, of gleams of a remoter world which visit the soul in sleep, of a desert peopled by storms alone. The streets were strewn with broken umbrellas which looked like funereal kites this little Chinese girl might have made. The bars of MacDougall Street were emptying. There had been a fist fight. A man leaned against a lamppost, arms extended as if crucified, the rain washing the blood off his face. In a dimly lit side street, where the sidewalk shone like a ballroom mirror at closing time, a well-dressed man without any shoes asked me for money. His eyes shone. He looked triumphant, like a fencing master who had just struck a mortal blow. How strange it all was, the world's raffle, that dark October night, the yellowed volume of poetry with its splendors and glooms, which I studied by the light of storefronts, drugstores, and barber shops, afraid of my small windowless room, cold as a tomb of an infant emperor. Only water? Lemon. There's lemon in it. This is just a bit later, when I was just a little bit less lonely, as you'll see, called Factory. I mean, what the area I'm describing is now called Soho. And in those days, there were small factories manufacturing all these things that are made elsewhere now, bat toys or, that kind of stuff. Factory. The machines were gone, and so were those who worked them. A single high-backed chair stood like a throne in all that empty space. I was on the floor making myself comfortable for a long night of little sleep and much thinking. An empty birdcage hung from a steam pipe. In it, I kept an apple and a small paring knife. I placed newspapers all around me on the floor so I could jump at the slightest rustle. It was like the scratching of a pen, the silence of the night writing in its diary. Of rats who came to pay me a visit, I had the highest opinion. They'd stand on 2 feet as if about to make a polite request on a matter of great importance. Many other strange things came to pass. Once a naked woman climbed on the chair to reach the apple in the cage. I was on the floor watching her go on tiptoe, her hand fluttering in the cage like a bird. On other days, the sun peeked through dusty window panes to see what time it was. But there was no clock. Only the knife in the cage glinting like a mirror, and the chair in the far corner where someone once sat facing the brick wall. I have a lot of poems about libraries, and because I spent probably a good portion of my life in libraries, various kinds of libraries. I still adore libraries. Because no matter how much you pay attention to, what comes out, books, new books, and this and that, and old books, you always find something that you, you didn't know existed, and it's always an astonishing experience. I didn't know this existed, this book. in the library. There is a book called A Dictionary of Angels. No one had opened it in 50 years. I know because when I did, the covers creaked, the pages crumbled. There I discovered the angels were once as plentiful as species of flies. The sky at dusk used to be thick with them. You had to wave both arms just to keep them away. Now the sun is shining through the tall windows. The library is a quiet place. Angels and gods huddled in dark, unopened books. The great secret lies on some shelf Miss Jones passes every day on her rounds. She's very tall, so she keeps her head tipped as if listening. The books are whispering. I hear nothing, but she does. Keep my eye on the clock. And this poem was written in the 90s. I guess during the wars in former Yugoslavia. I mean, you forget. I mean, anytime you write a poem about wars, I mean, I've lived this war since I was 3 years old, and after a while, all these poems are interchangeable, as you'll see. It's called Paradise Motel. This is one of those kind of, situations. We've been traveling, long road trip, and you intended to end, a particular place, and it's getting dark, or it's already night, and you say, I can't do it anymore, and then just, get off the highway, you see a motel or whatever, and, you check in, and, you want to take a shower, you turn on the television while you're undressing, and then you see something, some footage of some war footage or whatever, something. It's one of those scenes. Paradise Motel. Millions were dead. Everybody was innocent. I stayed in my room. The president spoke of war as of a magic love potion. My eyes were opened in astonishment. In a mirror, my face appeared to me like a twice-canceled postage stamp. I lived well, but life was awful. There were so many soldiers that day, so many refugees crowding the roads. Naturally, they all vanished with a touch of the hand. History licked the corners of its bloody mouth. On the paid channel, a man and a woman were trading hungry kisses and tearing off each other's clothes, while I looked on with the sound off and the room dark, except for the screen, where the color had too much red in it, too much pink. Poem called Ghosts. It's a very kind of a unique experience for me because the last thing I'm afraid of in the world are ghosts. And in New England, where I live, it's sort of almost obligatory that you have seen ghosts, and you go visit somebody, and it's like a sort of a evening full of neighbors and friends, and somebody comes from upstairs. The bathrooms are usually upstairs, and somebody comes down and says, he's back there in that room. And somebody else goes and says, yeah, the old guy, he's looking at his grave, I mean, there's like a little graveyard across the road, and so about 5 or 6 people go up there, and they all report that they've seen him, you know, and describe additional details. So I'll say, well, let me go, you know. I never see anything. But, nevertheless, ghosts. It's Mr. Brown looking much better than he did in the morgue. He's brought me a huge carp in a blood-stained newspaper. What an odd visit. I haven't thought of him in years. Linda is with him, and so is Sue. Two pale and elegant fading memories holding each other by the hand. Even their lipstick is fresh, despite all the scientific proofs to the contrary. Is Linda going to cook the fish? She turns and gazes in the direction of the kitchen while Sue continues to watch me mournfully. I don't believe any of it, and still I'm scared stiff. I know no way to respond, so I do nothing. The windows are open. The air is thick with the scent of magnolias. Drops of evening rain are dripping from the dark and heavy leaves. I take a deep breath. I close my eyes. Dear specters, I don't even believe you are here. So how is it you are making me comprehend things I would rather not know just yet? It's the way you stare past me at what must already be my own ghost before taking your leave as unexpectedly as you came in without one of us breaking the silence. See over here. This is a poem called The Clocks of the Dead. It was written in the 80s, but I don't know when. At some point, I imagine in the 80s, I noticed that there were fewer and fewer ticking clocks because batteries came into use. And, it used to be, in the old days, I mean, if you're an insomniac, and I've been a lifelong insomniac, at night, if you're in a strange place, visiting somebody or whatever, especially old people, you lie in the dark and you listen to various clocks, watches, things ticking, tick, 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 tick. And then, that was sort of, they were going out of existence. And once I asked some students, and my students who were in class about, they realized that there was a time when you had to wind your wristwatches, and they looked at me like, maybe in the Stone Age, kind of suspicious, They know I like to kid around, so it didn't occur to me that this poem will have to have a footnote. The Clocks of the Dead. One night, I went to keep the clock company. It had a loud tick after midnight, as if it were uncommonly afraid. It's like whistling past a graveyard, I explained. In any case, I told him I understood. Once there were clocks like that in every kitchen in America. Now the factory's windows are all broken. The old men on night shift are in Karen's boat. The day you stop, I said to the clock, the little wheels they keep in reserve will have rolled away into many hard-to-find places. Just thinking about it, I forgot to wind the clock. We woke up in the dark. How quiet the city is, I said. Like the clocks of the dead, my wife replied. Grandmother, on the wall, I heard the snores of your childhood. begin to fall. What time did I start? Ken, you're a smart guy. How long have you been reading?
Maybe you probably would just be reading for about 25 minutes, is that right?
How much more? I mean, I can read as long as you want me to, but how long have I read?
Why don't you go read for another 10 minutes and maybe take 5 minutes questions? Is that good?
Yeah, that 10 minutes is fine. Yeah, I just forgot to. That's perfect. All right. I have a lot of poems about New Hampshire. And I divide my sort of existence between a very small village in New Hampshire and New York City. So I write about both New York City, continue to write about New York City, and also I write about rural New Hampshire. And this is a poem called Country Fair for a poet. It was dedicated to the poet who just died the other day, Monday, Hayden Kurut. And this is in Deerfield, New Hampshire. There's Deerfield, Massachusetts, but this is Deerfield, New Hampshire. And they have a country fair very late in September, the last days of September, which is, in addition to the usual, stuff for kids. And it's a big agricultural fair, and, they have sort of the wonders of nature, huge, some kind of tomato or radish. Once they had a tallest rooster in New England. I saw it in the newspaper. I didn't actually meet Fred. But he looked very, roosters always look self-important, and this one is even more so. Kind of look down on the world, and it's kind of an interesting place to go to because where you see all that stuff, and the people who come to see it are very odd-looking people who come out of the woods and never seen fire before, Country Fair, in memory of poor Hayden. Well, I mean, he had a long life, and a great poet, Hayden Kurut. If you didn't see the six-legged dog, it doesn't matter. We did, and he mostly lay in the corner. As for the extra legs, one got used to them quickly and thought of other things, like, what a cold, dark night to be out at the fair. Then the keeper threw a stick and the dog went after it, on four legs, the other two flapping behind, which made one girl shriek with laughter. She was drunk, and so was the man who kept kissing her neck. The dog got the stick and looked back at us, and that was the whole show. Okay, I'll read a poem about actually time. We're all servants of time, slaves of time. That's the boss, time. And one day, the phrase serving time, somebody used the phrase, and I just kind of heard it as if for the first time. And the poem came simply from that phrase. I mean, I said, yeah, we're servants. We're more than servants. We're slaves, prisoners of time. And just a poem, came out of that. Serving time. Another dreary day in time's invisible penitentiary, making license plates with lots of zeros, walking lockstep counterclockwise in the exercise yard, or watching the lights dim when some poor fellow who could as well be me gets fried. Here on death row, I read a lot of books. First, it was law, as you'd expect. Then came history, ancient and modern. Finally, philosophy, all that being and nothingness stuff. The more I read, the less I understand. Still, other inmates call me professor. Did I mention that we had no guards? It's a closed book. Who locks and unlocks the cell doors for us? Even the executions we carry out by ourselves, attaching the wires, playing warden, playing chaplain, all because a little voice in our head whispers something about our last appeal being denied by God himself. The others hear nothing, of course, but that, typically, you may as well face it, is how time runs things around here. I want to conclude with another New Hampshire poem. There are planetariums in New Hampshire, not many, of course, and they're small. And in the past, there's not much you could see out of their single telescope because it was, not large enough for equipment. Telescope, and the weather is lousy most of the time. And they would, bring school children and high school kids and, nothing there to see. But since those days, they have, what they've done is they now borrow from world's leading planetariums, top ones, the best shots, their big hits. And so they get this kind of videotape, and there's an auditorium with seats that you can recline almost all the way back, and you look up, and it's a sphere, and all of a sudden you see the night sky, millions of stars, the usual stuff, clear, and so forth, and you watch a show. So this is a couple at one of these shows in the planetarium. Never yet equaled widescreen blockbuster that grew more and more muddled after a spectacular opening shot. The pace, even for the most patient, killingly slow, despite the promise of a show-stopping, eye-popping ending, the sudden shriveling of the whole to its teensy starting point, erasing all, including this bag of popcorn we are sharing. Yes, an intriguing but finally irritating puzzle with no answer forthcoming tonight from the large cast of stars and galaxies in what may be called a prodigious expenditure of time, money, and talent. Let's get the fuck out of here, I said. Just as her upraised eyes grew moist and she confided to me much too loudly, I have never seen anything so beautiful. Thank you.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Please, Catherine.
Why should poets give readings?
If you're a retired poet to earn a living. I think, no, I'm kidding. I started reading when I was young. it's an interesting experience. I mean, readings have existed for a very long time, and there isn't a college or university in this country that doesn't have a reading series. For a poet, one hears the poem in a way that one has never heard it before. I still, to this day, make changes. I mean, I realize something sounds awkward. I didn't read today from my new book, that was something, but there was a word that just struck me as being totally wrong when I was reading the other day, and in my head I instantly changed it. So it's a kind of a way of revising the poem one more time, or several more times, something like that. I mean, I suppose there are other reasons too. I wanted to see the country. You see lots of places, and it's interesting.
Anyone else?
So you consider yourself a poet, but a lot of your prose poems are very similar to short fiction or flash fiction. What do you draw the line, learn or otherwise?
Actually, I don't think that the difference between a short fiction and a prose poem, I mean, I don't know how successful my prose poems are, but a prose poem, a real prose poem versus, an anecdote or a piece of short fiction is that, short fiction is, it's a kind of one of those things, this happened and then that happened. It's a story that you kind of, when you finish reading it, well, that's it. You sort of took it in. First of all, a prose poem should not happen. I mean, it's an impossibility. It's like squaring a circle. It functions like a poem. I mean, what happens in a poem, a short poem, is you read the poem for the first time, you come to the end, and you are sort of interested, puzzled. You go right back to the beginning. Again, you start reading the poem because there's something more to it. It bites its tail. It's like a circle. And I think in a good prose poem, the same thing happens. It looks like prose, but it operates like a poem. So there's the additional readings would bring out, levels of meaning, which we can say that about this, prose passage, but I think there's a difference between the two. Anybody? Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead. This is probably the last one. Please ask these questions later, but so if we don't get to everyone, I promise. Well, I shouldn't promise. I think you'll answer it for you. But sir, go ahead.
When you're reading some of the poems, like just before doesn't when you read some of the poems, the pauses you put in don't necessarily line up with the commas and the punctuation. For you, was punctuation a large part or a large matter, or should we read, as I continue to read your poems, should I read them and just kind of sense more how they feel? And how they
You mean in this book, The World Doesn't End?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember this book, the poems, there was a lot of tinkering. It's a kind of a different kind of experience because I have plenty of experience revising poems and you change a line and then what needs to be done and so forth. But if you change a sentence, turn around the sentence, you tend to want to change other things in the paragraph, in the small bit of prose. And yes, punctuation played a great role. I actually had help from a couple of people who said, it'd be nice if you put a comma here. But I did see them in a way, the punctuation as those kind of stops or the way you would kind of think of lines and so forth. But the reason it's hard to be precise about these things that they're really sort of creations out of nothing. No one can sit down and say, I'm going to write a prose poem, a short prose poem. You don't. I mean, you cannot sit down and say, I'm going to write a short poem. Forget about prose poem. I'm going to write a 5-line poem. Why you can't? Because the moment you say, I'm going to write a 5-line poem, and you write the first line, you say, this is stupid. You write another one, it's stupid. Because, That's not how it works. Short poems, and I've checked this with lots of poets, somebody publishes a wonderful 4-line poem in a book or a 5-line, and you say, wow, great. I mean, some terrific poems are short, very short like that. Well, they're found in something larger. You have a poem that was like 2 pages or a whole page, and you scratch your head and you say, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. Years go by, and one day you look and say, this is it. There's 4 lines, a poem. There is something like that too about these things. They were scribbled without any intention whatsoever. I mean, they were kind of at various times in my life, in my notebooks. And many of them had more. I mean, they had more lines, more sentences. And, I went and just cut, because the whole premise of poetry, less is more. So it's what you leave out that makes it, and what's left that kind of makes it what it is.